And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Hey, thank you so much for being with us today here on this program where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we'll go through all the wonderful preliminaries a little bit later on in the program, but we're going to jump right into our guest, David Heeren. And this is his second time on the program. The last time he was on the program, we talked about the release of his book, High Time, and talking about these astronomical signs, if you will, cosmic signs of the return of the Christ. And today, we're going to talk about solving great mysteries of end time prophecy and discussing the mysteries of end time prophecy through a new book that he has out. And this is about an unusual kind of a miracle, if that's what it should be called. It stretches the laws of probability to an extreme, and he previously had not experienced. David, first of all, I want to welcome you to the program, and I also want to tell you that last time I looked, on the YouTube channel specifically, yours has been the most watched program of Tell Me Your Story on the Tell Me Your Story YouTube channel.
Wow, I'm so pleased. I really am.
Yeah, and we're talking, and I kid you not, folks, in the thousands. Now, that's not why we have him back. As I've always said, it's extremely important that we open our eyes and our minds to different ways of thinking and different ideas that are out there. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about what we do here on this program. End time living, despite conflict and hardship, all is well. And that is the title of the book, End Time Living. David, this is interesting. I have to say that I know that there are a lot of people within, and I use the term very broadly here, David, within the context of Christendom, who somehow, for, again, reasons only known to them, have devoted virtually their entire lives to the study of, not trying to figure out, but just to study and research about the end times, the second coming, Armageddon, and so on and so forth. Why do you spend so much of your time now in this pursuit when it's kind of like my death? Okay, I don't know when it's coming, all right? And quite honestly, I don't care. Because when it's my time, there's nothing I can do about it, right? And it's the same thing with this whole study of the end times. It's going to happen when it's going to happen, Dave, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, the amazing thing about it is how little so many Christians do know about it. I mean, you would think that everybody would be reading Matthew 24, Luke 21, Revelation. A lot of people read Revelation, but that gets confusing because it's not literal all the time. There is a lot of literal stuff in Peter, in Luke, in Matthew, where Jesus is preaching his sermon about the end. And they asked him, the disciples asked him, well, what will be the sign of your return? And they told him, but then he told them so much more. That Matthew 24 has only about this much. About identifying the sign. It has all this that Jesus added to that because there's so much important stuff that's been going on already, and it will intensify as we get more into the end time. And some of it's going to be scary. And Jesus said, don't be afraid. I got it. Don't be afraid. I'm going to shorten it of this bad stuff. I've got it. But we've got people now who are already reacting with fear. They're trying to say, well, I'm not going to have to go through that. I'm going to be up in this or that. And the scripture does not say that. But even if it came down to the thing about the pre-trib rapture, they would not know they were going to be going then anyway, because the whole theology of that is that, well, some are going to be left behind because they have to witness to the unbelievers that are left. But how do they know they're not going to be among the ones left behind? Actually, that would be the blessed place to be, because there would be an opportunity to witness to all these people. But they want to go up, and they don't want to have any part of the problems. But that's the blessed part. Jesus said it is blessed to suffer for the Lord's sake. He said that in the Beatitudes. He said it in two of them. He he thinks, a lot of times we think the opposite of what he does. And this is, the focus of this is really to get, first of all, me on the right track, okay? And then when I started to realize there was a lot here that a lot of Christians really either don't know or have denied for some reason, I think it's an important topic to deal with, because so many, I mean, many really do not have a grasp of the scriptures that talk about the end time. And there is going to be persecution. I've heard it say, well, that word just means pressure. Well, what it really means is oppression, and oppression is different from pressure. That's bad. But Jesus said, stand firm. I will show you what to say. By inference, I will show you what to do. He will take care of it. That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about the scriptures, but more from a more fundamental, foundational perspective. The Bibles that you and I read, they're in English. They're not in the original language.
Right.
And if I am correct, the New Testament, Aramaic, am I correct? Aramaic and or Greek were the original languages?
Well, I think Greek almost all Greek in the New Testament.
Okay.
I think almost all.
Do you speak Greek?
No.
No. Can
I've
you
got
read
some
Greek?
good Greek dictionaries.
Okay. This is one of the challenges, because I did a study of the Hebrew language, the alphabet, the 22 characters, similar to our alphabet of 26.
Right.
And in the study that I did, it talked about each character. And each character had its own legend. There was an associated color, an associated number, even a musical note, if you will, or vibration. There was a story behind every single letter. Then when you combined each of the letters, when you combined the letters into words, it created a whole new legend or story. Put those words together into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, and so on, and you get a whole new story each time you combine and combine and combine. I don't speak Hebrew. I would have to have somebody translate for me from the Hebrew. And so when it's translated into English, as the phrase goes, there is a lot lost in translation. And you have asserted that there are certain passages in reference to the end times that are, as you stated, literal.
Yep.
And yet there are those other scholars, whether you want to call them apologists or what have you, who say that you've got to be real careful, because you don't really know for certain, because of the translation, whether or not something is figurative or literal. And I think that's one of the first hurdles we might want to jump over. And here's the reason why I bring this up. You mentioned the pre-trib rapture. Well, I'll just say rapture, period. I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure where it is, but what I do know is the quote. They will be caught up to meet him in the air in the clouds of glory.
Right.
Now, I did a research on that passage and specifically the word air. I have my Strong's Concordance and my Bible. And it turns out there are two definitions in the New Testament of the word air. One of them is the atmosphere. You see the birds fly, clouds float through, and so on and so forth. You can feel the breeze when the wind blows. The second definition is akin to The Old Testament reference in Genesis to God breathing the breath of life into the nostrils of Adam. It turns out it's the second definition that is referred to in that New Testament passage. They will be caught up to meet him in the air in the clouds of glory. And it turns out the clouds of glory isn't literal clouds. It's all of the saints who have gone before. So can we talk about that issue in reference to, before we jump into some of the details of end time living, how do you jump over that hurdle of the issue of things getting lost in translation?
Well, the Greek is not the same as the Hebrew, and there's some of the Greek, for instance, Greek prepositions. There are like one or two words that in the Greek that could mean about 12 or 14 different words in English.
Mm-hmm.
So in could be at and up, and all of these could be one. So they're just guessing which preposition to use in some cases. And a lot of times it's a matter of logic, or in some cases, if the translators are really praying hard, they might get the Holy Spirit leadership and get exactly right. But what you just said about the air, that sounds great to me, because I'm looking forward to being up there with all these other believers in the air with Jesus. And it does say in the clouds, so we know it's actually going to be up. But that's really not a big issue with the end time. The end time is that period of time before that. That's the glorious time when we go to be with the Lord. However you interpret it, whether you're a pre-trib or whatever, once you go up, then you see the Lord face to face. We shall see him face to face. Mm-hmm. And we'll be with all the other saints up there. Right. And it's going to be a glorious time. But before then, there are going to be a lot of rough patches. And Jesus gave us instructions of how to navigate through those rough patches. That sermon takes more space in the Bible than any other sermon. A lot of people don't even read it at all. But I really think that's more important than the Revelation, because the Revelation, almost all of it's figurative. Whereas Jesus spoke literally. Of course, the language difficulty exists. But when you compare translations, there's a similarity. There may be some specific differences, but they're very similar. The overall picture is similar. And Jesus there is not, each word is not as important as if you were giving a specific revelation prophecy. Each word is important because each little factor. But he's just talking conversationally to the disciples. So what we really need there is just to get the big ideas that he's conveying. And some of them are really simple, like stand firm. Do not be moved. No matter what they do to you, don't be moved. Stand firm. And they're just great advice in there, because it's going to be a hard time. But Jesus wants it to be the greatest time of all. Let me just read a paragraph to you here.
Sure.
This is from John L. Cooper. And I found it in the Billy Graham, well, it's the Graham family, Decision magazine. And he's wrote this: in my view, we must hold two principles in tension: love those who disagree with us, and never ever back down an inch when it comes to truth, not a single centimeter. Now, Jesus said, stand firm. Well, he put it in two words, what Cooper just said. It is not loving to lie to people, nor is it loving to sit silently while those we love make decisions that will bring death and destruction upon their lives. The difficulty is learning how to forgive and not repay evil for evil. Pray for enemies. Speak with humility. This isn't easy, and this is the kind of thing we're going to need an abundance of in the end time, because there's going to be a lot of antagonism. Therefore, let us be armed with truth and grace and a spine. We will need it. I shudder to think of those who may sit in the pews of churches without ever coming to repentance, without ever coming to repentance and faith in Christ, because we bought the world's definition of being loving and were fearful of hurting their feelings. We must proclaim Christ to the world. Let us come together in unity by putting an end to doing what is, quote, right in our own eyes, and begin doing what is right according to God's word. I really like that because that's what it's all about. If we are willing to be bold in sharing the gospel, a lot of people are going to be saved. The Bible, it's in the book of Zechariah, and an Old Testament end time passage says that 1/3 of all human beings will be going up when that, when the rapture occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2/3, of course, will be staying down, and they'll have a different destination. But those of us who know the Lord, that's exciting, because Billy Graham himself said, and D. James Kennedy said the same thing, probably less than 10% of the world's population right now are saved and are going to heaven. Well, 1/3? If that would happen today, there would be 2.5 billion people going up. But we know there's no one near. Some nations haven't even heard the gospel yet. And others, there might be, like a place like China where there are missionaries, there, what is it, 100? I'm trying to remember the exact total. It's 1.5 billion people. Well, of those, we're lucky if 5 million of them are saved, because that's the way it is in most of the world. So during the end time, it is going to talk about revival. It is going to be the utmost in revivals. People are going to be saved left and right because they're going to be afraid. The things that are going to be going on are going to be scary. They'll be afraid. And when people get afraid, their ears are open. Help me, tell me what I need to do. And that is what is going to happen. We need to be able to tell them.
Now, I've heard the phrase, God is not the author of fear. And yet your description of multitudes of people being saved during the terrible times, that seems like an awful motivator for believing. I'm afraid, so I'll believe. Instead of making the conscious free will choice, I choose to believe because I love the message, the messenger, etc., etc. I love God, and it just seems to me a little backwards. And I'm going to add one other thing to that. I saw this documentary on this whole process, this whole timeline, and they used the phrase during, I think it was in reference to their perspective after the rapture, that the rest of the believers on earth, or those who become believers, there was what would they use the term probation, that we were on probation down here, okay? And I'm going, but I'm not a prisoner. So why would I be on probation? I didn't commit a crime, and that goes back to a very core element. Neither you nor I asked to be born into this world. Okay? I don't recall ever saying, yeah, send me down to earth through the parents that I currently have. I don't recall that. So here I am being birthed into this world, and immediately upon arrival, I'm condemned because of original sin. And, you used the word logic earlier in terms of trying to define some of the terms and passages in the Bible. That concept of being born into what has been referred to as original sin, correct me if I'm wrong, David, it doesn't make sense logically. I'm trying to grasp that concept. In the Old Testament, it says that the sins of the father are passed on to the sins of the sons to 7 generations, not into infinity, but to 7 generations. And so I'm sitting here going, well, then I don't have anything to worry about because I know I'm beyond 7, could be 7,000 generations. I'm free and clear. Because, again, I didn't ask to be here. And yet, as soon as I come in here, boom, I'm stamped with the original sin. Can you share a little bit about that? Because then we have to go into, not don't have to, but we're going to go into end time living.
Well, you've just gotten into a theological issue, which right now is not, I'd really rather not discuss it because we could argue about it. But the point being, we have a certain amount of time to do a certain amount of stuff here. I want to get back to your original statement about fear.
Yeah, okay.
And this is really one of the amazing things about God. He gives us free will to do and to choose. And he also gave the angels, he created the angels, gave them free will to choose. And about a third of them decided, well, we don't want you. We're going to go off and do our own thing, whether you call them demons or whatever you call them. But according to the Bible, 1/3 of them went off. And they are the ones that are the formatters of fear. But God, he uses everything. He uses Satan. He accomplishes his purposes in whatever circumstances that we throw at him in sin, whatever Satan throws at him because he hates him, God still accomplishes his purpose, either just directly by his hand or through his people. And this is one case where he wants to do it through his people. And the way he does it is by having us share Jesus, not turning and running when things get rough.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying, well, I'm going to be preaching to rapture. Well, that's not in the Bible. It's just not there.
Right.
They have stuff that they say, well, this means that, but it really doesn't. And when you get into the literal translation, it really doesn't. But why would they want to flee the opportunity?
Right.
To it says those who are the source of salvation to many will shine as the stars forever and ever. Well, who would not want that? The original disciples, when they realized what was really going on after Jesus was crucified, they turned around after fleeing originally. They turned around and said, wow, this is great. And Peter preaches this sermon in Jerusalem. How did all those people hear? He didn't have a microphone. He got a voice. The Lord gave him the voice to speak with power, and he'll do the same for us. That's really the basis of the end time. And I know of 3 men who, because of fear, became Christians, not because they were frightened into the kingdom, but because they were scared. One of them was scared to die, and he told this preacher, he said, what can I do to be saved? Because he was afraid to die. He knew he was going to hell. One of them came to me. He said, I've got cancer, Dave. You don't curse. Why don't you tell me about your religion? Because I don't want to go where I think I'm going. Mm-hmm. And so I shared the gospel with him. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad thing, to be afraid and to be open when you weren't previously open to hear.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my comment on that.
Well, now, and you mentioned something I think very important earlier in reference to the rapture. That word does not appear anywhere in the Bible. It was obviously something made up, and I often wonder sometimes about how certain words are created, shall we say, and it's like rapture. I know what the word in other terms means. I'm enraptured over this thing, that thing, the other thing. But to make it the catching away of the saints into the air kind of thing, it's like, how did you incorporate that? I often wonder about that. But that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of a sidebar thing that I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
We're talking with David Heeren, and we're talking about end time living. David, I want to know what. You've really already stated this. Are there steps in reference to, or elements, maybe is a better way, not so much steps, but elements within the process or the aspect of end time living that we need to take a look at and work on incorporating into our lives?
Yes, and I'm going to start at the end.
Okay.
Some interviews they kind of cut off. This is beautiful. I recognized in the Song of Songs, which is kind of just interjected in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Something really important. Yes, it is an allegory. That's the traditional part of it. That the king can represent Jesus, even though it was Solomon. He allegorically represents Jesus, and the bride of Solomon allegorically represents the bride of Christ, which we find out in Revelation 19 is the church. Joan, my deceased wife, she got it. She picked up. This is her Bible. I'm reading it now. Mine is a mess, and so I picked up hers. I said, "Well, mine's falling apart." And right there in the Song of Songs, right at the top, she wrote, "Jesus and me." Well, that's what it's all about. And during the process of that, this bride is left, and she's beaten up. It doesn't say she was raped, but it does say she was very beautiful, and these guys went after her and beat her up. And how does she react? Right after that, remember, she represents the church. And how does she react? The very first thing she starts talking about after that is how much she loves this king who has left her to be beat up and who knows what else. And she just loves him. And these witnesses around her who had been really sarcastic before then, all of a sudden they get it and they want to help her. Well, this is about us. This is about us and how we are to be together in this. And it's about our love and commitment to him, who does sometimes, Jonathan Cahn called it the unpresence of Jesus. Sometimes you won't be able to say, well, I don't, Lord, I don't feel you today. Where did you go? Well, that's his unpresence, and it's usually a testing factor. How will we react? And this bride in the Song of Songs reacted perfectly. She loved him. She loved him, loved him, loved him. And she forgave him. She didn't even mention that he had left her to go through this. And these people around her were really impressed, and they were attracted by this. And they say, well, how could we help? Well, that's what happens when we love. That's what happens when we forgive, even our enemies. Mm-hmm. Great things happen. Richard Wormbrandt wrote about how people, torturers, became tortured because they gave themselves up when they realized they just, in tears, they repented and became Christians, these torturers. Well, this is what we're talking about here. The end time is going to be so difficult and so, either you do or you don't, that a lot of people will just say no, keep going their own way. Mm-hmm. But some will say, hey, wait a minute here. I want this love. I don't want this hate. I want this forgiveness. I don't want this resentment. Of course, Satan is all hate and resentment, and so are a lot of these people. But love and forgiveness, and that's what the Song of Songs is all about. And it is so beautiful. Joan has 24 notes in it about her and Jesus. And this is really what the end time is going to be about. It's going to be more and more of an intense relationship between us and the Lord, which is the most important thing.
David Heeren is my guest. End Time Living is the subject. It's the title of his latest book that we're talking about here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We hope that you will continue listening to this program, because we are here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., as well as Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We also podcast these programs on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, many other locations as well. We certainly hope that you will listen to and subscribe to the podcasts. You can also go to YouTube, the YouTube channel, Tell Me Your Story, Richard Dugan, and you can watch these interviews. You can get to know David a little bit more, and so to speak, virtually, if you will. And we will be linked to his website as well, so that you can find out more about what he is discussing with us. EndTimeMystery.com. End Times. There's an S in there. EndTimeMystery.com. endtimesmystery.com is the website where you can actually find out about his other books as well. We certainly hope that you will do that. Matter of fact, okay, let's do this over here. There we go. And we encourage you to check out his other works. He has several other books, including the High Sign, which we talked about in our last interview, The Day of the Lord, which is great Bible prophecies soon to be fulfilled, What the Bible Has to Say About the USA, God or Not? Question mark is also another one of his works. You've been writing quite a bit here. How long have you been on this particular? Oh, I will say search. How long have you been on this particular search through these various books that you've written?
Okay, I have about as many. I have 9 sports books. When I got toward retirement, I had an experience one day. I was reading it through Isaiah, got to 6:8, where the prophet overhears the Lord talking. Well, who shall we send? Who will go for us? And I said, "Here am I, send me." And for some reason, after I was in retirement age. For some reason, after many years of reading them and not understanding, I prayed that same prayer. Well, here am I, Lord, send me. And then I started to understand. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I believe it was the Holy Spirit came in and ascended to my prayer. He didn't make me a prophet, but he enabled me like never before to understand these prophecies. And that's when I started writing these Christian books, especially the end time books.
Mm-hmm.
I really think of the ones I've written, just for your audience, that the most important ones are the High Sign, End Time Living, and God or Not. God or Not is written for the generation which is basically atheistic, Generation X, and all the young kids who have been to public schools where they were taught atheism. And it's a horrible thing, but that's basically what happened. So they're atheists. God or Not presents miraculous things that went on in my life, and some that were just phenomenally astonishing. And when you get to the end of that book, and it's a short book, you're saying, you're nodding your head, and yeah, God exists for sure. And that's the purpose of the book, to try to attract some of the people, especially the young ones who now are atheistic. But the whole end time theme, which most of the books have, began with that prayer, "Here am I, send me." And it really started the next day when I would continue reading through Isaiah. Oh, I never noticed that before. I never saw that before. I didn't understand that before. It was the very next day. And since that passage 6:8 is toward the beginning of Isaiah, I went right straight through the important prophecies of Isaiah with new understanding. And I thought, wow, I really do need to write some of this down. And that's how the books got started.
Well, I have to say it's fascinating that in terms of the fact that you have devoted so much of your time in your later years here, in particular, to this subject, especially considering, and and again, I say this with all due respect, my friend, due to the fact that you are closer probably than I hope. And in a way, I don't hope, because I don't want to lose you. But nonetheless, you're older than I am. And so, as my father, he's 90, and he's even closer. Okay.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, I remember when a particular pastor in the televangelistic world passed away. I think it was back maybe in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. And he just was beating everybody up. And he was taking that Bible of his like a 2x4 and just smacking people everywhere. And when he passed away, the one thought that flashed through my mind was, well, at least now he knows the truth.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe, and I would think you probably feel the same way, the Bible is not to be used
Yeah.
as a weapon to beat people into submission. And unfortunately, that's been the case in many instances over the years. Is that's what people will use the Bible? I mean, even and you can even go back to the Inquisition. They were using their interpretation
Yeah.
to beat people into submission. And I don't believe that's, even though, yes, I know the Word of God is referred to many times metaphorically as a two-edged sword.
Yeah, but that's different.
Yeah. I just find it's, and I have to tell you, it's really sad because there are a lot of people who, a lot of damage has been done to them and their faith because, and I have to ask you this question in regards to speaking of faith. Now, you made a wonderful statement, or your wife did. It's Jesus and me, right?
Yeah, Jesus first.
It's not Jesus, David, and Richard. It's Jesus and Richard, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes.
So I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, but when I was working for the Christian radio station, I was told by a minister, a pastor, that I wasn't saved and I wasn't ready to meet God. And I sat there thinking, how do you know? How do you know? I thought this was a personal relationship between myself and God. I didn't realize that you were the third leg on the stool that, oversaw. And so this is one of the things, you talk about how two-thirds, was it two-thirds that were going to be saved, if you will, or
One third.
left? One
That's what
third.
the Bible says.
Okay.
That's a lot.
And we're not, and you say that probably from a mathematical standpoint, we're not even close. So we're still a ways off.
We're maybe 15% of that. And both Billy Graham and D. James Kennedy agreed on that number right now is less than 10%.
Okay.
And Graham, go ahead.
But here's the kicker though, David. How do we know? How do we know that it isn't already at one third? I mean, are people actually going out and conducting surveys of the 8 billion people? I guess that's the other aspect of it too. It's like the Bible says that no man will know the day or the hour of his return, right? And yet there are people who constantly will use the Bible and they will do some secret codes. I still remember, oh my God, Pastor Wisenot was his name in 1988, and then again in 89. And then when he passed away, I read about him. He passed away, I believe it was in 2004. And once again, I would say, well, at least now he knows the truth.
Yeah.
That I don't care what you do, you can get yourself an electronic slide rule, get yourself the best, fastest, most sophisticated computer, the greatest Mensa minds in the universe, and you're still never going to figure it out. And that is not, and that's one thing I want to make clear to our listeners. That's not what you're doing here. You're not telling anybody about any specific anything. You're saying, look, it's coming, it's just like the sun is coming up in the morning and going down at night. It's coming.
Right.
I don't know when, but you know what? It's like going on a trip. If you're never told where you're going, or I should say, you're told where you're going, but you're not told when. Don't you think maybe you might want to pack a bag and have it by the front door ready to go? That's kind of what you're talking about here.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the Bible. The Bible is a book of love. Jesus came down and sacrificed himself for us. And the scripture says he became sin for us who knew no sin, so that we could become the righteousness of God in him. And that's just what he did on the cross. When he suffered, he suffered in place of our sin, because all of us do things that are wrong. All of us say things that are wrong. But he suffered for all of it. He took all of it upon himself. And that is an amazing thing. When we talk about the right and wrong thing, yes, Jesus even prophesied in his end time sermon, there's going to be a lot of false prophets out there. And he didn't say that some of them wouldn't be Christians, because false prophecy can come through a Christian just as easily as it can come through a non-Christian. That has nothing to do with whether you're saved, born again, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, I thought of a guy on TV, 30 years in a row, he predicted Jesus' return. He was wrong every time. And people kept watching him. People kept watching him. His pastor, he wrote a book, 1 million people bought it. He said, Jesus is coming back, and one of 4, he was specific. He said, well, there's going to be 4 eclipses of the moon in a short period of time, a couple of years or something like that. And he said, Jesus is coming back in one of those. Well, he didn't. That's just another false prophecy. As far as the gospel is concerned, it's not to beat people over the head, but it's the main point of the gospel is to show the beautiful act that Jesus did for us. Because when he was beat up, suffered and died on the cross, that was for us. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to come to earth. He was God. He didn't have to come to earth and be beat up. But he did for us. And that is really the heart of the gospel. Mm-hmm. And both Graham and Kennedy, who have international ministries, said, and I sat down with Kennedy. I knew Kennedy, and Graham preached at his church, so Kennedy knew Graham. Both of them said that in their experience, as far as believing in Jesus and trusting him for their salvation, which is what it's about, that it was only a very small percentage. And they both said that less than half. Now, this is a good one. Actually, it's a bad one. What you're seeing in Christendom, a lot of cases, is not Christians. A lot of these guys who are preachers are not Christians. And they're not preaching the gospel at all because they don't know it, they don't believe it. And you get a lot of the bad stuff from them. And they're not even Christian. And both Graham and Kennedy said that less than half of the Christian pastors are actually believers. And this, I thought, well, that can't be right. But then again, Kennedy, I was trained in evangelism explosion. And Kennedy said, a lot of pastors come to be trained in evangelism explosion. And he told me less than half of them, well, he said more than half of them had to be shared the gospel with, which is another way of saying they did not believe in the saving work of Jesus Christ when they started out. And if pastors are not believing, then they're certainly not preaching the gospel from the pulpit if they don't believe it. Just because you say you're a Christian doesn't mean you are. Just because you say you're a good person doesn't mean you are. Just because you say this or that, it doesn't necessarily refer to what's in here. The Lord knows what's in here.
Right. And that's one of the things that I have often, like I said, often challenged people on. It's like, you neither know whether I am saved or not, and I don't have to justify to you whether I am saved or not, because quite honestly, it's none of your business.
That's right.
It's absolutely none of your business. It's between me and my Creator. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, they just don't get. They really don't.
It's like
yeah, go ahead.
You have to be sensitive to, well, like the guy who came to me, he said, well, will you help me? Well, yeah, then he wanted me to tell him. Sometimes they do need a shove to be motivated to go and say, well, tell me about your faith because I'm interested. Things are not going well for me right now. Or things are going well for me right now, but I want to know, and that's when you can have the opportunity to share with them.
Right.
My phone is going in the background.
Yeah, I hear that. No problem. We're talking with David Heeren, and we're talking about the plethora of books that he's written, some on sports, and yet there are also some that he has written on what is faith-based, if you will, and it is very much focused on helping those who are genuinely interested in making this a better world for themselves as well as the world to come. And it's, and that is the belief that he has. based upon what he has researched. And we just present it here, as we do with all of the subjects that we talk about, for your consideration. We lay out this smorgasbord, folks, and we ask you to come and partake. And we hope that you will try something new. If you take something and it's familiar to you, that's fine too. There's no problem there. But we ask that maybe you come back again and again and again to try something new and just check it out. That's part of the reason why we do these programs, because we are trying to hopefully inspire people, David, educate them, enlighten them, if you will, to the different, as I like to refer to them, the different philosophies that are out there, and there are a lot of them. And I do understand, because I was born and raised Catholic, and again, I, so to speak, grew up in broadcasting in the Christian broadcasting area. Although my boss, when I left that station in 1995, he said that I was a casualty of Christian radio because I didn't toe he didn't put it this way, but I did. I didn't toe the party line. Because many of the answers that I was getting from many of these people, both nationally, internationally, as well as locally, from my perspective, mind you, didn't make sense. Logically, just did not make any sense. And again, I don't put any of what I believe on anybody else. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, David, no, David, you're wrong. No, you're out of your mind if you think that this and that and the other thing. No. First of all, that's not the intent of this program. It's not to straighten people out. If anything, I've gotten straightened out sometimes. It is basically to have a wonderful conversation about these subjects and see what direction the universe takes us along the way, just like our last interview. And I'm very grateful for your being a part of this conversation. I think it's important. If we can't talk about these kinds of things, then we just can't talk, and we need to talk to one another, right?
Right. And incidentally, you mentioned that you had been a Catholic. When I married my wife Joan, she was been a Catholic, and I was kind of she was more devout than I was. But I was kind of a perimeter Lutheran. I was not all that, you know. Later on, the Lord got a hold of me and got a hold of her too, both of us, and drew us closer to each other and closer to Him. That's what He does. He doesn't drive people away. He draws them together in an atmosphere of love, and that is the way it should be. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we do discuss things, but it should not be with an antagonistic attitude. And I know that what you're saying is true, because I know I've seen it in some churches. There is an antagonistic attitude, and that is not a good thing. No,
it's not. We cannot sit and reason together if we can't sit together. You know what I'm saying? It isn't going to happen.
No, you're right. Right now, the place is a mess.
Oh, it is. You are.
And that, when you look at it from the Lord's perspective, I think, is indication that He's not happy with it. Because that's what usually happened. When He was not happy with Israel, what happened to Israel? Well, they went into Babylon or into Egypt, and that's the way it's going now.
Yeah,
all over the world, countries are experiencing some really bad things, and it's because they are just going against His principles. I'm not just saying that they're not Christian, because that isn't even all of it, but they're just defying His principle. They're killing each other. They're torturing each other. They're doing this and they're doing that. They're oppressing each other. We're seeing a little bit of oppression right now in the United States. It's just that is the way it is. Until He catches our attention, we say, "Whoa, enough." That's the way it's going to be, I'm afraid.
No, I couldn't agree with you more on that. Until we reach the next level, if you will, in this ongoing play, so to speak. This is the way it's going to be, and we've got to, as you have stated over and over again, we have got to stand firm.
Right.
Stand on our 2 feet, speak our truth, and not worry about the outcome. At the same time, David, let me ask you about this question. Let me ask you this question in regards to the concept here in America, in the United States of America, that they say was founded on the main document, the Constitution of the United States,
Right.
the Bill of Rights, and in the amendments, and specifically the First Amendment giving us freedom of speech. And there's a part of me that feels they left out a phrase regarding freedom of speech. And the phrase is with responsibility. In other words, if you're going to freely speak, then you better be willing to take responsibility for the outcome of that free speech. Your thoughts?
That's in the Bible. I mean, the God holds people accountable for what they say, and even states, do not curse, do not this, do not this, and a lot of it has to do with what comes out of the mouth, the hatefulness that comes out of the mouth. This is reprehensible to God, and this nation was founded under God, but they couldn't get the whole Bible into the Constitution. They did a good job, and it's not only freedom of speech, but it's also freedom of the press and freedom of religion. Now, a lot of times, those who are emphasizing the freedom of speech want to jump right down on the freedom. They don't want to hear anything about freedom of religion, but it's really all three. And the freedom of the press implies responsibility, not lying, not twisting and turning, and which we see so much of now.
I would think, David, that I don't know, maybe you wouldn't agree with me on this, but that the echo chambers that exist in broadcasting today are a violation of the freedom of the press because they're spinning one specific side.
Right. And they're lying about a lot of things.
And again, we're not casting aspersions on
one
any
of the
one
things,
group.
I'm not going to get into any specifics. But
No.
one thing I've noticed is that a lot of the people who are lying, and they will point to somebody else, oh, he did this, he said that, he said. 9 times out of 10, when they do that, it's something they have said, it's something they have done, and they're very familiar with it. So they're very easy to accuse somebody else of because they know all the details, because that's what they themselves are guilty of. And I see that, that goes all the way back to when I was in the beginning a young journalist and talking to a colleague, and he told me that they were going to do historical revisionism. That is to say, they were going to change the school textbooks so that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and all these are bad guys. They had slaves or something like that, But actually, all of the slave traders were in the other political party. The slave holders. To say there was some slave holders, but the Civil War was fought over that. But you don't get that because you don't get it was the slave haters who started the Civil War, the ones who hated the slaves. You get it. Everything is upside down because they did it. They said they were going to do historical revisions, and they did it. They've got the exact opposite of the Ku Klux Klan as to which party actually established it. The exact opposite of everything. They brutally treat Washington and Jefferson, although they do want to hear his separation of church and state, which didn't mean what they say it does, but they just twisted everything. And at the time, and this was bad me, at that time, I did not believe they could do it. And I laughed. He said, yeah, you're going to rewrite it. Well, they did it. The history textbooks and other textbooks that appear in the public schools today, they got so much untruth in them. And when you see kids coming out of that environment, a lot of them are committing suicide because they were taught all this hopeless, negative, okay, I'm going to say it, crap. They were taught all this junk. And the kids, why should I live through this awful world that I've just been taught about?
Yeah.
And they commit suicide.
Well,
And
I will tell you that on the 500th anniversary of Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, in 1992, having gone through the public school system, although I went through kindergarten and first grade in Catholic school, I learned about the story of Christopher Columbus, in school. And basically, he discovered America. I still haven't figured out why America is called America. I know it's for America Vespucci, but why did he get the credit and not Columbus? If Columbus was the one who actually, according to the history books that I read, discovered America. Be that as it may, in 1992, I heard three different versions of the history of Columbus. One was a saint, one was the devil, and the other one was somewhere in the middle somewhere.
yeah,
And I figured probably the one in the middle is probably the more accurate.
probably. Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, this is really something. And a lot of times I'd like to think that as time goes by, we will find documents here and there and what have you that will reveal new insights, not total revisions, but insights into the historical figures of our past, both here in America and around the world. And I'm kind of in agreement with you. By the same token, part of what I do also hear, especially on the part of maybe some of the revisionists, not all, is the fact that those who do not want any of this change, they want to leave things as they are unwilling to deal with the dark side of America and how we treated the blacks, how we treated the Native Americans, the Irish, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, every nationality, virtually every nationality on the planet that has ever come to this country, in terms of the horrible ways. And I mean, during World War II, they threw Japanese into internment camps. Oh, and what's the deal with that? What about they were American-born citizens, but because of their nationality, they weren't trusted. And I know Germans were treated that way. And the list goes on of a lot of and I use this term to keep it gentle, but we don't want to talk about the shadow side of America. Yes, there is good. There's a lot of good that we have done. We have been there for other countries. And when there are natural disasters in this country over the centuries, the people of that area, they jump up and they go and they help. And it doesn't matter what color you are, how much money you earn, what political persuasion you are, what religion you are. You're a human being and you need help, and they're there to help. And that's the beauty of this country. But what about a balance here? Let's talk about both sides. Let's acknowledge both our foibles, as well as our celebrate our accomplishments.
I agree. And originally, this is where really, when you look back, Jefferson, okay, he was a school board. He was in charge of a school board. I think it was in Virginia. And one thing that he insisted on was that there would be a Bible in every student's hand. Now, you won't read that in the history books today. And in fact, some of the other stuff, like Pocahontas being blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, when you get back to the origins of this nation, it was a melting pot, and most of the people were just trying to survive.
Right.
They were living in the wild. They didn't have what you and I have now. They just came over here. They didn't have a house. They didn't have anything. And they had to shoot their own food or pick it. And it was a melting pot, and they were just trying to survive. And they did help each other. And they even most of them even had good relations with the Indians, which you will not hear, not see in any history books, because we're not going to say that. We don't want to say they were good. Well, actually, most of those settlers, they had suffered in Europe or wherever, and they came over here to get free of that oppression, and they were not oppressors. The oppression began a little bit later, when we got the political system going, and people started saying, well, I want to be this, I want to be that, and when I get to be this, I'm gonna. And that's that, but that didn't really happen right away. Yeah, it was a pretty good place. And people were surviving, and they were helping each other. Yeah. It was only when the political structure started to, and that's when it started to go bad, because people were, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that. I'm gonna fire you. I'm gonna. And that's when the oppression really started. And you're right, it's pretty bad right now.
Well, I'll tell you, I interviewed a gentleman about a year or so ago talking about how we need we need a new movement in this country to back to a more a reasonable form of government. And so the very first question I asked him was, so when was the last time we had a reasonable government? And without missing a beat, he said, it was about 3 minutes after the ink dried on the Constitution. Immediately, and it's basically goes to your point that as soon as the political element was a manifest, and of course it was even before that because it took them a long time to craft this document.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of arguing.
it just really it's just been so to speak, it's been going downhill ever since.
Right. I do think that some of the early administrations were pretty good. I think that Washington, Jefferson, Adams,
Yeah,
Lincoln were honorable men, but in between Adams and Lincoln, there were a couple who weren't. And it
yeah,
started to really go down after the murder of Lincoln. It really started to really deteriorate. But even so, a republic form of government is better than a communist form of government, where the communists go, you don't like it, kill you. You don't like
yeah,
it, kill you, torture you. It's better than that.
yeah.
But this is why Jesus had to come for the salvation of human beings, because when we go our own way, it's always the wrong way, you know.
Right, right. Well, David Heeren, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this program and sharing your perspective on things, especially on end times and end time living, the title of the book that we've kind of focused on at the beginning of our program here. I really do appreciate you and what you're doing, and I wish you much success in the work that you're doing, and hope that you continue. And I always put this proviso in here, if you should choose to do so, I hope you do live a very long and prosperous life.
Already have.
I'm glad. Yeah, I've noticed throughout the entire program you've had a smile on your face.
I didn't think I did. I thought every once in a while I smile,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do like to smile. And you made my day when you told me about how that podcast. I think you said it was a podcast and had
Yes.
done really well, because I don't really know that much. It does not reflect as much in the book sales as it does in the podcast and the other perimeter stuff. But I'm glad you told me that, because that's encouraging.
Well, we'll find out how well this one does once we get it posted up on YouTube, and we certainly hope that people will avail themselves of either or both the podcast as well as the video cast. And again, I thank you so much for giving us so much time here on the program. And we as I said, we wish you much success.
Well, you too, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm going to do the same thing I did at the end of the last program. I'm going to ask you those 3 questions. You may not remember them,
Oh, no.
but they are questions that I ask all of my guests, even the returning guests, because sometimes the answers change. Sometimes they don't, but that's okay. And the first of those 3 questions is, who is David Heeren?
Well, right now, I think I would start off by talking about my relationship with God. He's just done some really amazing things. I mean, first there was that thing, "Here am I, send me," and then all of a sudden I'm seeing this stuff. But that was only one thing. The God or Not book that opens with 2 miracles. 2 miracles. I'm losing my house, my mortgage is I can't pay it. And then all of a sudden, the day before foreclosure, the pastor comes up to me and says, "God told me to give you this," and he handed me an envelope, and it's a check for the exact sum needed. And that was just one out of a dozen things.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord has really taken charge of, well, I don't say taking charge. He doesn't boss me around. He kind of leads me around.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say it all focuses on my relationship to God. That would be the important thing.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you are doing now?
trying to help people prepare from a Christian perspective for the end time that lies ahead, which is going to be difficult.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Well, right now it's just barely that. This is the focus. I used to work a 40-hour week. I still do because of this, what we're doing and what my promoters have. It's great. It's really great because a lot of people are getting the message, which I hehope is always founded in the Bible. That's where all of this has to be found, as far as I'm concerned.
And David Heeren is my guest. David Heeren is my guest, and he is here talking about, of course, his book. The latest one is End Time Living. We certainly hope you will go to his website as well, because I think it would benefit you. It wouldn't hurt you. None of this stuff's going to hurt you, folks. Okay, you want to go to the website endtimesmystery.com. Endtimesmystery.com. The website will be linked to David's website as well. And again, David, thank you so much for joining us. And we thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lol.